Now here's something you don't see every day. This is a group of overwintering wood turtles. This picture was taken a few weeks ago as part of an ongoing citizen science project, the Vermont Reptile and Amphibian Atlas. They're currently conducting a fundraising campaign, which we'll discuss along with what's happening herp-wise with Vermont's leading herpetologist. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Across the Fence. I'm Jolie Whitney. The Vermont Reptile and Amphibian Atlas was established in the mid-1990s. It collects and disseminates data needed to make informed recommendations regarding the state's status, rank, and conservation of Vermont's reptiles and amphibians. The person who's maintained the atlas is our guest today. Jim Andrews is a herpetologist and a conservationist. He's been looking out for salamanders, frogs, snakes, lizards, and turtles for over 3 decades in Vermont. Welcome back to Across the Fence.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me in.
We're happy to have you.
Yep.
And what kind of started your passion for amphibians? Do you remember your first reptile?
You know, I don't actually remember the first one, but I do remember seeing a picture in our family photo albums that shows me with a bullfrog on my head, you know, walking around with a little bullfrog, good-sized bullfrog.
Great. So there were signs that this was a passion for you.
Yeah, and we actually came from a family that had a real interest in almost anything living.
Great.
I've seen pictures more recently of my grandmother with a table full of snakes.
Wow.
Yeah. This was in India, where she was educating locals about which snakes were venomous and which snakes were not. But
wow, so it's a family tradition.
Oh yeah, it is.
All right.
Yeah.
Before we jump into too many details, can you first tell me what a herp is? Why are these two classified together?
Yeah, we use the term herp, and it's a slang term really, or a common usage term, just because it is herpetologist. It is the group of species that herpetologists study. Now, it used to be pretty simple because it was reptiles and amphibians grouped together. They are not, as you kind of implied, very closely related, but they're both cold-blooded or ectothermic, and so they were thrown together and have stayed together, except we have learned in recent years that we really ought to consider birds reptiles.
Wow, you wouldn't think.
So herpetologists, still though, we don't study those warm-blooded reptiles. We only study the cold-blooded reptiles.
All right, I got it.
And the amphibians. Yeah.
And speaking of, you said they're cold-blooded, so what are they doing this time of year? It's awful cold out.
Yeah, well, thankfully for them, they chill down and they really don't have to deal with this cold weather very much. I mean, they try to hide. Like you saw the picture that you had of the turtles.
Absolutely.
That's pretty straightforward, in the bottom of a river, someplace protected maybe by a log or a rock, protected from ice scour in the spring, so that ice won't be a problem and wash them downstream. But there's lots of other cool adaptations, like frogs. We have 4 species of frog that actually can freeze and then thaw out. I mean, imagine that with a human.
Yeah, that would, yeah.
You know, you make it through if you didn't like winter.
Sure. I feel that when I'm cleaning off my car, I think I do that.
Yeah, and so it's an amazing thing. They actually have a natural antifreeze that they have, that they create and they put in their cells. So their body does freeze, and if you were to feel the body, it would feel frozen. Wow. Solid. But the cells themselves are protected with this antifreeze, and then when it warms up, the heart starts pumping, their lungs start moving again, and they pop out of the leaves and move to the ponds to breed. So there are different approaches for different species. Snakes, for instance, have to get underground. And contrary to what a lot of people think, they don't actually dig any holes. They have to find holes that maybe a woodchuck or a rabbit, or maybe it's just rocky and there's plenty of holes where they can get underground. So they have to get below the frost line, which makes climate change threatening because the snow used to be an insulating layer. So if we had 2 or 3 feet of snow all winter, that was insulation. And if we lose it and it gets very cold, they could freeze.
Sure. And kind of to build on that, you've been expanding a lot of your maps about where animals are living and have been spotted in Vermont. So what have you kind of learned over the last 30 years?
Well, the maps are really showing us the data. When we started gathering data, and we needed the data in order to make informed recommendations to the Endangered Species Committee in the state. And we just needed more data. We didn't even have a complete list of the species we had. So we wanted to figure out, okay, where are things now? And then we can start tracking how is that changing over time. Sadly, we have had one species that disappeared entirely. We didn't have many of them, and they were up in the northwest corner of the state, boreal chorus frog. But our maps have greatly improved with the help of citizen scientists, people reporting what they see, taking a picture.
Yeah.
And nowadays, with people carrying cell phones, they usually have the ability to take a picture right there. And as opposed to 20 years ago when we started, did they have their camera with them? That's not so much a problem anymore. So our maps have greatly improved over the years.
And let's see the first one. We actually have the American toad. What can you tell us about this map?
Well, the American toad,
That's this guy.
we actually have two types of toads. We have American toad and Fowler's toad. This particular one, American toad, is a habitat generalist, which you can tell by looking at the map on the right. On the map on the left, it shows what we knew when we first started gathering data. And then on the map on the right, it's showing that we have now, the dots are showing you that we have photographic evidence, proof in our database that this species is living in rural areas and even suburban areas. It's a habitat generalist as long as it has food, a place to hide for the winter. It's a digger. This one can dig down to hide. Then it can be in every state, every town, city, and gore.
Sure, except for Ludlow, as the map
Except for
shows
Ludlow. We need a picture from Ludlow. Come on now.
But you said this indicates more people reporting and not so much that the toad
It is.
is kind of expanded.
It's not that the frog has expanded its range. It's just that, and let me mention that again.
Sure.
People say frogs and toads.
Oh.
Toads are just a type of frog.
All right.
It's a bumpy frog.
Okay. So this bumpy frog is everywhere in the state.
Yeah, it is.
And
it's still doing fine.
And let's move on to the elusive Jefferson salamander. This one is a little less all over.
Unless people get out on rainy nights, they're not usually going to see this thing. A beautiful, solid,
hard to spot on a rainy night
brownish,
too.
gray salamander that moves when it rains. And as you can see on our map on the left, we had very little information about the distribution of the species. And now we're seeing how well it lines up with, say, limestone calciferous soils. It's sensitive to pH. Acid rain is something that we used to talk about a lot. And we still get acid rain, but in places where that acidity is buffered by the soils and bedrock, it's still hanging in.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And the last critter that we want to talk about is the eastern milksnake.
Yep.
And it looks like these snakes were only reported on the western side of Vermont, and now they're pretty much everywhere except for the Northeast Kingdom. So kind of talk about that expansion.
Yeah, and we should just be clear that we're not suggesting that has expanded its range. It's just that we have
more data.
Yeah,
much
lot
like
better data.
Our toad frog.
Yeah. And so it's really neat looking at this map now. By the way, I should mention, if others grew up in a rural area like I did, my mom used to talk about this as the spotted adder. That was the name that we used to use. And nowadays, eastern milksnake is the approved name. But notice the cold regions is where it can't survive. It's an egg layer. And so if you lay eggs, those eggs have to be in a warm enough area to incubate and hatch. And the southern part of the state where it was too cold up in the mountains, probably not there.
Sure.
And then the northeast corner. And so it lines up very well with plant hardiness zones.
Yeah, we actually have a map of that as well, kind of showing the plant hardiness and those two lining up. And so the atlas is one of the best ways that somebody can, just any old person, myself, can participate in citizen science. So how can people report any herps they see?
Sure. I mean, all it requires, ideally, a picture. If you can't get a picture, then a description as best you can. Describe why you think it's a milk snake or what you think it is, and then just send in the photo and the date and the location. We have a form on our website,
Great.
A very simple form. So they just go to vtherpatlas.org, and it says report a species.
Easy as that.
And many people end up on our database first because they don't know what species they're looking at. And so they're looking at our identification information. And there we remind them, please report it, and this is how you report it.
All right.
Yeah.
And why don't you tell me about kind of one of the best finds from 2024?
Well, one of the things one of the rare species that we've been looking at was one that we hadn't seen for about 10 years.
Wow.
At all in the state. We hadn't gotten any new reports. And so I worked with Luke Groff, Vermont Fish and Wildlife, who's in that picture, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and a bunch of our volunteers. We all went to where we had last seen one of these big snakes.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, most people in Vermont think of garter snake. When they think of a snake, they think of something about that big. But
so who's this guy?
This is the racer. This is the North American racer. And it likes open areas. In this particular case, we're on a power line. And with enough effort, we spread out and covered that power line, and we found one of the snakes. So it's hopeful that there's still a population there. And this is southeastern Vermont.
Great.
Yeah.
And we're almost out of time, but what does it mean to find something that you haven't seen in 10 years, a species
Well,
that's
it's
rare?
just hopeful in terms of the fact that species is still there, and that we ought to continue our efforts in that place. We have worked with the state of Vermont and actually created dens so that we have created some more habitat and overwintering areas for the snakes.
Great. And you guys are actually running a fundraiser right now. Tell me how people can give back.
Oh, if they go to our website, vtherpatlas.org.
It's right there on your screen.
Yep, there's plenty of information on how they can donate. We survive off some money from Fish and Wildlife. We get some money from the Lintel Hack Foundation. We get some money from Forests and Parks. But a full quarter of our annual budget is this fundraiser. So they can go there and they can send us checks. There's details.
Great.
There on our website.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks.
This was great.
Yeah.
And if you would like to contribute to the Vermont Reptile and Amphibian Atlas 2025 fundraiser, you can visit the website on your screen, as we just said. Once the goal is met, which may be happening before this program airs, but you should still go and donate. And donations are always welcome, of course. And that takes care of Across the Fence for today. My thanks to the crew behind the scenes here at WCAX. I'm Jolie Whitney. Have a good one.